Good evening and welcome to the Housing Scrutiny Committee meeting on Tuesday the 21st of April 2026. It's just exactly 6 o'clock and we're in the Town Hall, we're actually in the Council Chamber of the Town Hall in Royal Leamington Spa. The meeting is being live streamed to the Council's YouTube channel, and as part of the Council's commitment to reducing the use of papers, councillors and officers may be using electronic devices during the course of the meeting. My name is Councillor Peter Phillips. I'm Chairman of the committee. Alongside me on my right is Darren Knight, Deputy Chief Executive, and my left is Josie Wainwright, who is our Scrutiny Officer. In addition, we have from the Housing team, Christian Melgard, Interim Head of Housing, Nicola Hobbs, Housing Strategy Policy and Enabling Manager, Philip Dark, Interim Asset Manager, and also joining us this evening are Councillor Davison, Leader of the Council, and Councillor Melrose, Portfolio Holder for Housing. Emergency procedure. We've all been here before, but there are no planned emergencies, no planned tests rather, of the emergency alarm, so if it does go off, it's a real one and we follow our normal procedure. And I'll again remind members that when using the mics, please make sure you don't place any electronic equipment directly in front of them. Otherwise, that will affect the quality of the transmission and the recordings. Members of the committee and the public should be aware that pre-scrutiny Q&A questions have been published on the Council's website. We've had the last ones this afternoon. Have you all had a chance to read those? I'm not getting any shakes of head. Right. Thank you. So, on to the formal agenda. Apologies and substitutes. So, apologies to Councillor Kate Dixon, and Councillor Kohler is substituting for her. And Councillor Boat has sent his apologies this afternoon that he's unable to make this evening meeting. I don't think there are any other apologies, therefore. No. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do members have anything to declare? No, thank you. Item 3. So, item 3 is to confirm the public minutes of the meeting held on the 31st of March, so just 3 weeks ago. If I can start by just referring you to the summary of actions document. Most of those have been answered. In fact, the only one we had outstanding, again, can I thank officers and Cabinet for their prompt responses on these. The only one outstanding, I think, was question 11. The development team have been working on checklists used at handover for new build properties. Councillor Melrose, I believe you have an answer for us this evening.
Yes, I do, Chair. So to confirm the formation of the scheme stages checklist is still in draft, will be available for feedback in May. The scheme stages checklist will act as an interim control document and the primary process for affordable housing at Warwick District Council, while the full procedures manual is in development. This will be a structured gateway-based framework to ensure consistent compliance, due diligence, formal sign-off across all schemes to cover the full life cycle from initial opportunity through to post-completion, with clear defined stages and required checks at each point. Checks to include strategic fit, financial viability, risk, technical and legal due diligence. While the procedure manual is developed, the checklist will align and sit beneath it as a practical tool to support compliance.
Thank you, Councillor Melrose. We may come back to that in one of the later items, I suspect. But that answers item 11. We actually still had some items outstanding from, if you can throw your memories back to the 27th of January this year. And I'll just note the numbers. It's item 1, resident involvement group, so the holder for housing advice, the last resident involvement group was on 21st January. They were circulating an update by email. We haven't had that yet, I believe.
I will apologise, Chair. That has slipped through my to-do list I have on my screen. So I will add it to my to-do list, and I promise I will get that circulated before I go away tomorrow.
Right, thank you, Councillor Melrose. Then item 13, the Strategic Finance Manager would investigate how much of the rental income is used to pay for resources now and when the 40 new additional members of staff are in place. We don't have that yet. I'm not sure, Mr Melgard, is that you or Mr Rowlands?
Thank you, Chair. I think with Easter holidays, we've been slightly delayed with forming some of these responses, but I'll take that away and come back to you with an update next week.
Okay, 13 and 14, broadly two sides of the same coin, so I'll take that answer also for 14. And then 16, the Landlord Services Manager will circulate an update in relation to the Energy Work Programme. We're still waiting for that one, so could you take that away, Mr Melgard, and have a look at where that is? Right, sorry. So, members, we're still in the minutes section. Are there any questions, queries, comments on whether it's on the minutes or the action items from members? No, thank you. Then I need a proposer for the minutes. Councillor Barton, and seconded by Councillor Jones. All those in favour, please? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Those minutes are approved, and we'll now move on to this evening's agenda, item 4, which is the work programme. So we're now going to get into the meat. First of all, members, you will observe from the agenda that there is no compliance plan update this evening. We agreed last time, and I'm sure you will recall, that given we only met 3 weeks ago, I'd far rather the officer spent the time not just producing reports for the sake of reducing reports, and there's only a short turnaround between meetings. So that is why there is no compliance plan update tonight. We will have a compliance plan update on the meeting on the 27th of May. 27th, yeah. There's also a constitutional requirement for an end-of-term report to come to Housing Scrutiny Committee in May. And I have a feeling that I'm going to get a draft of that in the next few weeks. We'll get it out to members beforehand so that you can get a chance to review and comment on that. But can you please add that to the programme? I'm also proposing adding a verbal stock condition survey update to August committee meeting and a further report including a lessons learned exercise on the stock condition survey to the work programme in November. So, members, when I looked at the work programme with Mr Melgard last week, it is very heavy in May. Looking very overloaded. So I've discussed with officers then what items can be deferred, and this is my proposal to you members, if you're unhappy I'd like you to comment, or if you want to change this around. So I'm proposing that the resident engagement for large planned works report, the HQN midpoint review update, the homeless strategy update and the annual complaints report all be deferred to the July meeting. So that's 4 reports that are being proposed to be delayed. And in addition, as we already have the AWAB's report coming to the May committee, AWAB's law report coming to the May committee, I propose we also defer the housing service area plan update to July. Officers will provide the Q1 update on performance of major work streams, but the service areas plan will have been agreed by Cabinet as well. Having said that, and if you're following me, it's having taken some of the workload out of May, we've now got a problem in July. So we're conscious of that, but August is looking light. So members, over to you, please. Can I have your thoughts, please? Councillor Barton.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. There was that first lot you wanted to move to July. There was one in May that related to a yearly report. will that be too far out of date by the time it comes to us? From what date to what date was that?
Are you talking about our report to, the Housing Scrutiny Committee report to Council?
I'm not sure, can't remember. What were those 4 things you wanted to move to? What were the 4 things you wanted to move?
So there was the Housing Service Area Plan. That's going to go back, and that, sorry, I'll read the wrong page. Large planned works report, the HQN midpoint review update, the homelessness strategy update, and the annual complaints report. It was the annual complaints report.
Yeah, the annual complaints report. From what date to what date will that report be? Or will, by the time it comes to us, will it be 6 months out of date? Or
Mr. Melgard.
I think the intention is to bring through to the committee a quarterly report in the meantime, so not for next meeting. I think the priority is to bring the annual report for the financial year, April to March, but also the self-assessment against the Ombudsman Code. So the Ombudsman Code self-assessment needs to be provided by the end of September, so moving to July gives us space to do that. It's not pushing it too far ahead, albeit the data that you'll be reviewing will be slightly later by the time you review it in July. But the intention going forward is that there'll be a quarterly update, so you can see that. We also provide complaints information through the briefing note on the compliance plan. So we provide stage 1 and stage 2 housing complaints and any issues and escalations from complaints there. So there is line of sight on complaints performance. The annual report just goes into a lot more detail, including about corporate complaints as well. So the intention is to have the time to do the work on the complaints policy, compensation policy, and the self-assessment. So committee can see that in July before it's submitted to the regulator, to the Ombudsman in September.
Are you happy with that?
wrong button. Will we have a comparative year from the year before with that report as well? Presume we will. Yeah.
Members, other comments, please. Councillor Kohler. I should say welcome, Councillor Kohler. I think this is your first Housing Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you. It is my first. I feel a complete newbie. And with that perspective, I note that for May, you've got an AWAB's law update, and then also, which you're not proposing to defer, as I understand it, along with a housing service area plan, which in the comments it says to ensure it meets compliance with the regulator, particularly AWAB's law. So part of my brain is going, which you are proposing to defer, and part of my brain is going, would it be more efficient to tackle both of those in the same meeting?
I think our focus on our website law is new. It'll be, what, in May? We'll probably have 6 months of data. And I think we want to go straight into that because when we saw back in, I think it was January, that we're not yet there, and we will be there. That's what the insurance, why I've kept that in May. You make a fair point, but I don't think, I think I'd rather ensure we took our web's law first and not get it tied up in the service area plan on its own. Mr. Knight.
I think I probably would agree to keep Arab law on the plan for May. It's an area of, it's new, it's an area of high profile and obviously of regulatory importance.
Councillor Gorman, did I see your hand?
Yeah, it was in terms of the July meeting, because you were commenting that the July meeting would then be full. Can we just move all the July items to August, because that's pretty quiet?
I think that's probably a very sensible proposal. Just trying to see what the items are, whether there's anything that's of critical timing importance. So the items in July, the compliance plan was still there. will still stay there. Pennington's endpoint review, Mr. Melgard, do you know whether they're on time for that or not?
Yes, Chair, we had the first meeting on Monday, yesterday, and the work should be completed, certainly the evidence gathering, within the week, so we would expect to have that ready for July, and the intention would be that that is presented alongside the HQN midpoint review, so that members can see both in tandem.
Okay, I would certainly agree that the garage void update can be moved without too much problem. I don't necessarily want to go down that rabbit hole too often. Our cabinet colleagues, I see, are nodding vigorously that one after the last few weeks or months. So you'd rather keep the Pennington's End review in July, Mr. Melgard, I think I hear you saying.
I think for me, Chair, if it makes sense, if we are completing it relatively soon, our compliance board will have line of sight on that, and we'll discuss. We would want to present that with the earliest opportunity. We have quite a number of audits coming through, but the Penningtons will give a sense of where we are on the compliance plan, and HQN more generally. And for me, it makes sense to include those even as appendices to the usual update. So we know we've got agreed for Damien Roach from HQN to attend on the July meeting, and we are seeing if Latrice Thomas can attend in person for July. So the Pennington sort of endpoint and HQN midpoint, it's the earliest opportunity, I think, for members to see where we are on that journey, and it would be helpful for them to see that sooner rather than later, I'd suggest. I
think as that Pennington's report was basically the start of when we had the, what was it used to be called, the Asset Compliance Committee from November 23. I think it's probably worthwhile keeping that there. Councillor Gorman, so I'm going to take the garage void update to propose we take that to August. The resident engagement communication strategy quarterly update. I'm hesitant to move that because I want to get us into a process on that. But I'm also conscious that we're now slightly overloading July. So it's a quarterly update. That's going to be April, May, June. Will you have the information available on the 7th of July for the first quarter, given the 4 or 5 week lead time to reports?
I think the team have got a good rhythm in terms of collecting information. It's purely how much information the committee wish to see, how often. We can make it a shorter note, so it just captures the progress on the plan, and by bringing to attention any exceptions, so we can make it a shorter, sharper paper, just focused on the actions, if that helps.
I think we want to see what's happening in the first quarter. So I'm going to take Councillor Gorman's proposal, if members are happy, that we actually turn this item from just saying a quarterly briefing note into Q1 2026-7 quarterly, and we'll move that to August. Are you okay? Yeah. Are you okay with that, members? Yep. Nods all round. For those who can't see, you're not on camera. So, Councillor Gorman, thank you for that proposal. I think that was helpful. Other comments, members, on the work plan? So, with that, obviously, whoever takes the chair in May, whether it's me or anybody else, will work on the July. Because we'll be in a new municipal year by then. We'll work on the July agenda ahead of the 27th of May. But with the changes as I've outlined, can I have a vote in... sorry, I propose the changes as I've outlined. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Barton. Can I have a show of hands, all those who approve? Thank you, that's unanimous again. Thank you very much, members. So we now move on to item 5. Members will recall, I think some of us recall very well, that we had a slightly interesting meeting in December, which I didn't actually mean to trigger off the lengthy deliberations we had. But while those deliberations were going on, Councillor Melrose and I were sort of looking at each other across the chamber, and we agreed that we would bring both motions back to, or bring them to the Housing Scrutiny Committee if the council approves, and they did approve the motions. I will. That's why you've got items 5 and 6 on the agenda tonight. So the first one is temporary accommodation for families. And Nicola Hobbs, I believe that you're going to provide an introductory summary to us. So can I pass over to you?
Thank you. So this report was requested after a notice of motion at the Council on 3rd of December, asking for a report to Housing Scrutiny and Cabinet to ensure that where families are placed in temporary accommodation, standard is checked to ensure that safe sleeping facilities and living conditions compliant with the Lullaby Trust guidance. Hotel accommodation should not be used for placement of families or pregnant individuals, and neither should B&Bs. That we strengthen liaison with local education and health partners to ensure effective communication and coordination. If families are in temporary accommodation, that there's a recording task on our homeless systems where people have consented for us to share that information. And when they do present as homeless, that they are asked for us to share that information with GPs and schools. And where they do consent, that an email is sent out. And that due weight is given to the accessibility of support networks for all vulnerable tenants, including children and those who are pregnant, before placing them in temporary accommodation. So that was the motion. So my recommendations, or officers' recommendations, are that you note the approach to the provision of temporary accommodation for families in Warwick. You endorse the Council's approach to the provision of temporary accommodation, recognising the statutory duties that are placed on the Council and the operational constraints in sourcing suitable accommodation, particularly in an emergency situation. What that means is that sometimes we will have to use bed and breakfast and hotel accommodation. And we couldn't have a blanket policy to say that we would never use it in emergency situations. We will have to. And so because of that, you support the continued use of a case-by-case approach to it, to our placements, but ensure that all placements meet legal suitability tests, that they're subject to appropriate quality checks, and wherever possible, align with best practice guidance on safe sleeper standards and access to support networks. Also, that you support the strengthening of our partnership, working as set out in the Warwickshire Joint Statement of Intent to Tackle Homelessness, which was linked as an appendix, and further specific actions with local education and health services, including developing processes within our homelessness system so we can record the consent and that we can then share it as requested. And note that all of these actions will be progressed and refined during the next year as we develop the new South Warwickshire Housing and Homelessness Strategy, which I'm bringing back as an update, I think in July, as we develop it during the year. And that strategy is going to look further at how we reduce reliance on unsuitable forms of temporary accommodation, such as bed and breakfast, and so we develop our homelessness prevention activities in line with national policy.
Members, we had a debate of this back in December, but I think this is a time for a calm comment and reflection on this. Any comments, questions for officers?
Excuse me if I've misunderstood, but I just want to get clarity on something. and you probably explained it really well, but I've missed it. But when it comes to informing the schools about children who have lost their home and moving into temporary accommodation, is there laws prohibiting informing schools and GPs if consent is given?
No, if they give consent, but not everybody gives consent, because currently families don't always want to inform people that they're in temporary accommodation for a whole variety of reasons.
Yeah.
So we do ask for consent at the point of approach, and if they give that consent, we'll share it. But at the moment, we don't do it if they say no. We might refer to if there's safeguarding issues, then we will make a safeguarding referrals. But if they say they don't want the children's school to be informed, we would consider that. But we'd look at it in terms of why is there a safeguarding issue. But some people just don't want their business discussed with the school.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Would you look into safeguarding as a matter of course, as a reason why they might not want their GP?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So that would just happen, would it?
Yeah.
That's great. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did I understand it applies both to the school and the GP potentially? Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Was that you, Councillor Knight, saying something there? No. It was, no. Councillor Kohler.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the report. It's nice and clear. I've got a question in 4.5, where we're talking about what the plan is going forward, I think. It talks about bed and breakfast accommodation for emergency short-term placements with a legal maximum of 6 weeks for families. Has that changed, or has that always been the case?
No, that's set in legislation. I think under the Children's Act that children shouldn't be placed. You shouldn't place children and families in bed and breakfast unless there is no other suitable alternative available in an emergency, and if you do, it should be for no longer than 6 weeks. And so we would always choose, it's never something we want to do, we'd never want to put a family into bed and breakfast, but neither do we have available accommodation that's sat empty for people. It's constantly full, so if somebody presents and we have to provide them, we will find suitable accommodation, but then we have a team that then tries to move people out or try and people that are in the pipeline to move on, see if we can move them quicker. So it's a constant juggling act to try and make sure that any families in B&B move out quicker. Or, for example, we had a family in recently and we managed to get them an offer within 5 weeks. And so we worked with assets to make sure that was pulled forward a lot quicker so we could get them out quicker. So whatever we do to make sure that family, if we can get them into permanent homes quicker, that's the biggest outcome for us and for the families. But if they've got to stay in temporary accommodation a bit longer, we'll get them out of bed and breakfast within 6 weeks.
Thank you very much. Can I ask, do we report anywhere how many... Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to add on the children in bed and breakfast longer than 6 weeks or more. We report that as a service area plan top line measure, which comes to scrutiny each quarter and will be also reported as part of the suite of housing needs measures that we capture. Particularly, we had a focus on that and up to Christmas, and we shared with councillors that we're able to remove all children out of bed and breakfast accommodation before Christmas, which was a real goal of the team, because we felt that no children should be in that form of temporary accommodation during Christmas.
Yes, Nicola.
And I suppose just on that point, we did have one that tripped over by 1 day, but their 6 weeks, I think came up on Saturday, but their new property was ready for them to move into on the Monday, and it would have been wrong of us to move them out into a self-contained flat, moved all the children just for 2 days to hit a performance indicator in order they could then move in. So we do make judgments like that. That might be one that would appear, but obviously we'd have that reasoning behind in the performance indicators. But so we're not trying to manage cases to hit KPIs, but we're just doing it for the best outcomes for the families.
That is reassuring to hear, because it's well documented that managing by KPIs will lead to unintended consequences if you're not careful about it. So I'm glad that the team are being careful about it. So can I ask, you mentioned that they're recorded in the service area plan, sorry. Is that recording how many families have been in temporary accommodation and how many have exceeded the 6 weeks?
At the moment, the report is how many families have exceeded 6 weeks. Going forward, we're just, as Christian said, we're just reviewing our suite of KPIs, and we're hoping to report on the number of placements for both families and singles into temporary accommodation, split into B&B and other accommodation, and then also any that have gone over 6 weeks. But those KPIs will go through our internal governance process to be approved and then put forward.
Mr. Malgar.
With those KPIs, members will see the performance assurance framework on a quarterly basis, which is also shared with Cabinet on a quarterly basis as well. So we're just in a process for the current financial year, so refreshing some of those measures to make sure that we've got the right level of detail. But with the work that Nicola Hobbs has been doing with the team, we're just making sure that we've got the right level of detail coming through, particularly those key areas that we want to track. So there'll be some additions that you'll see coming through the path, which will also include PIs around AWAB's law. But you'll see those coming through as part of the quarterly updates to committee.
Thank you. If I may, just one more. I noted that, and thank you for those detailed explanations. In section 1.1, where we're reporting back the original motion or the agreed motion, it talked in terms of families and pregnant individuals. And I noted in section 4, it talked extensively about families, but didn't mention pregnant individuals. So I was just wondering if there was a reason for that.
Should I respond? No, there wasn't. I think it's because there's a slight nuanced difference between placing families and placing people who are pregnant. Because if you are pregnant, it is likely that you can go into a one-bedroomed accommodation. If you're family, you might not be able to, but I hadn't picked up on that. I suppose if I'm using the term family there, it's families/pregnant individual. But no, it wasn't intentional.
I had kind of assumed that it would be kind of talking in broader terms, but I think it might be useful for just to specify that at some point, at some place in the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Will do.
Councillor Melrose.
Because obviously this report will go to Cabinet, we'll make sure that's stated referenced in there as well.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Barton I saw first before Councillor Whiteman, but no. Okay. Councillor Whiteman.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wanted just a bit of clarification on point 4.9 of the report. So you mentioned consent is sought from the household to share information where relevant. I understand that under the government strategy housing support, our future tackling child poverty, it will become compulsory. Do you know timescales in 2026 when you're expecting that sort of to be a compulsory requirement, or is it timescale not specified yet?
No, we don't have the details of the time, but it's been set out that it will be brought forward as compulsory during this, we think during the year. So we're going to work with our health and school partners to make sure that we're ready to go when it's implemented.
Okay, because I presume national government is bringing that in as a proposal because it's recognised as a public good that actually children, you know, the local authorities, the local doctor surgeries, the schools are informed of their location in nearby. So I'm just wondering, I mean, at the moment, you will only do so if it's in the family housing support plan. How many children, you know, would have a housing support plan that didn't recommend notifying the schools? Do we have any sort of figures on that? It's not a sort of hypothetical scenario, though. There are actually children currently in temporary accommodation who we're not informing the schools. Is that correct?
In the consent, there's a general consent form that they agree that we can share information across statutory services, but I don't think that the school and GP practice are routinely notified. So we don't collect information on who's refused it because it's not something that we had thought that we were doing in the past.
I mean, I may be being a little bit naive here, but I'm just sort of trying to understand, if we recognise it's a public good, we know the government is moving to make it compulsory, we've got children who it affects, why would we not move now quicker? Is there anything stopping us moving quicker now to notify in every case?
It would probably look at GDPR rules because obviously we might be presenting sensitive information, so it would open the council up to that. So that's why we can't do it right now. We can't. Once the councils and local authorities are compelled to do it, it covers you from that perspective. So it's not a housing act, it's an information governance act that would probably, if we were to disclose this family lives in a temporary accommodation and they've not given us permission, we as a council open ourselves up to that we've disclosed potentially sensitive information. So be around them rules.
Have we sort of got advice on that? Because I would have thought from a GDPR thing, if there was a overriding public interest to protect children's welfare, that it would actually be a legitimate reason for disclosing. I can't really believe that there's a serious GDPR. And if there is a conflicting interest, for me, the need to protect children in temporary accommodation would beat any GDPR risk every time.
I'm not sure, Councillor Melrose, you're probably more of an expert on GDPR than I am, but I think rather than go down that rabbit hole, could I ask officers to look into that rabbit hole with legal, please? Because I think the point you make, Councillor Whiteman, is valid and is worth looking at.
I would probably just surmise, obviously if it's to protect children and the officers think there is a safeguard concern, they are compelled, but if they believe there's no safeguarding concern and the family has not given permission, that is where at the moment we would be in that position. Obviously we can go and clarify that for you, but that would be the sort of rules you'd be looking at. So as you'd appreciate, if families don't give consent and there's no safeguarding concern, it's that sort of grey area.
But
Okay,
not
we'll ask
notifying
that to be
presumably increases the risk that there would be children in temporary accommodation, even not receiving education or not receiving healthcare, which I would have thought is a safeguarding concern, to be honest. Not in every case, but I would have thought there was certainly a welfare issue there at least.
Nicola Hobbs.
I think what perhaps I didn't make clear is that we are going to implement it as a practice standard. The only issue will be if it's not legislated and they don't give consent. So we will amend our consent forms and we will work with partners. So we will do it as part of our planning, so the sport planning now. So we are going to do that piece of work. We're not going to wait for it to be mandated. However, if they don't give consent, then that's the bit that we'll seek clarification on.
Members, other comments and questions? Councillor Firth.
Again, it could be my lack of knowledge, but it's just point 6.1. Are some people intentionally homeless? And is that, what circumstances does this occur?
Yes, you can be found intentionally homeless. That is one of our tests of homelessness. So should you do an action that causes you to lose your permanent residence, then you could be classed as intentionally homeless. So despite being homeless and not having accommodation, we might not owe you a duty if you intentionally did an action that meant you lost your property.
How many of those, what portion of our homeless population is that?
I don't know off the top of my head how many intentional decisions we make a year, but I can get that information back to you.
If that's okay, I'd be quite interested. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Ms Hobbs, could you possibly outline what scenarios might be deemed as an intentional act which could result in you being deemed intentionally homeless, please?
So, I suppose one example is if you get evicted for rent arrears, we would then look to see why you had those rent arrears were caused and whether or not you had the money to pay those rent arrears and what other income was going into the household and whether or not you chose not to spend your income on paying your rent, for example. So that could be a case where you would be found intentionally homeless. So that would, if somebody has not paid their rent but had the income to do so because they spent it on a holiday or whatever they'd chosen to do, then they could be found intentionally homeless. Sometimes people will give up a property through choice and then might find themselves homeless. So we'd look at that as well. Why have you left your last property? What were your reasons behind it? So you can't just give up a permanent home and expect that you will be housed again by the local authority. You have to look at the reasons behind why their home was lost. Does that make sense?
So, following up on that, in terms in general, the legislation that is changing for landlords at the moment, have you assessed what that means for our policies, and is this included effectively in there? Because the government's changes are quite significant for both tenants and landlords.
Yes, we're just planning for that at the moment. So the Renters' Rights Act has brought in new legislation for landlords, and the government is anticipating that there will be more homelessness presentation from the impact of that, and has given us additional funding for more temporary accommodation to consider that. As yet, we've not, it's not come in May. So as yet, we've not had many through the door, but it's May. So we're just looking at the impacts at the moment about how many we think that will be.
So there's no need to change our policy, it's just a funding issue, or is that oversimplifying that?
The Code of Guidance, which is set by the government, which is what we follow for homelessness policies, that's been updated shortly to reflect the changes in the Renters' Rights Act. And once that's been amended, then we will follow it.
Right. And that may need to come back to this committee or our cabinet? Yeah, okay. That's just one thing to keep an eye on. I will leave with you to, Mr Melgard, to make that decision along with the chairman of the committee. Sorry, I missed you, Councillor Kerber.
Not a problem at all. I was just following up with from Councillor Jones's question, really. I guess one thought that was flicking through my head is that when we have policies that are written in a very black and white way, it sometimes leads to scenarios where officers may well think it's kind of being harsh or treating people unfairly. So are our policies in that area written that give officers some discretion to make sure that, again, this is a bit like using KPIs, it can lead to unintended consequences. Sometimes too strictly written policies can also lead to unintended consequences. So is there some discretion for officers to exercise in those areas?
We follow case law. So the tests of homelessness are set out in law, and there's examples where it's not clear. There's normally case law that's been tested that we would follow. And if we were still unsure, then we would take legal advice. So it's the policy is more how we, I don't know, how our interview notes might be set out, but the tests of homelessness are set out in law. It's a legal test.
Thank you.
Couple of points from me. We talked about you're making, moving tenants into presumably, homeless people into presumably council housing. Are tenant or social housing, are tenants, prospective tenants, able to turn down an offer of a house if they're homeless, or do they have to take the first house they're given?
No, if currently in our allocation policy, households that have been awarded priority due to homelessness have 4 weeks in which they can choose where they want to bid for that property. So currently they still have that choice. a lot of authorities don't give people that choice and give a one offer that the council give to them.
So we still got that in place, that
We've
they have
still
a
got that
choice.
in
That's
place.
good. Okay. And are we obliged to consider anybody who present themselves as homeless who lived outside the district and have come to the district? It's a constant one that I know has been, certainly in the 10 or 12 years I've been involved, keeps on coming up.
Yes, we do consider people from outside of the district, and you can have multiple homelessness applications in more than one district. However, we may refer the duty back during the point of our investigations. Equally, we might accept the duty in Warwick. It would be dependent on the circumstances of that situation, but certain categories of persons, such as care leavers and people fleeing domestic violence, don't have to have a test of local connection in order for us to accept their homeless duty sits with Warwick.
So if we've got 3 councils they could present themselves or have presented themselves to, how do you sort that out? I mean, it's, I'm going down a rabbit hole. Again.
We've got one at the moment and they've presented to authorities. So one normally would make an agreement where one authority will lead the investigation and the other authority will wait, but the applicant can choose where they want to pursue their application from during the course of the investigations.
Members, thank you. That's a very useful discussion following the council meeting in December. This is actually recommendations that we're being asked to propose and vote on. The recommendations are set out on point 2. And have I got a proposer for those recommendations, please? Just need one person. Councillor Barton, thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Knight. Can I see a show of hands of all those in favour of supporting the recommendations? That's unanimous again. Thank you very much, members. And we now move on to the next item. Section 106, acquisitions. So I think we're back to you, Ms Hobbs.
Yep, me again. Okay, so again, this is another notice of motion, approved by the Council on the 3rd of December, which requested that officers report to the Scrutiny Committee and then Cabinet on approaches to ensuring the responsible acquisition of Section 106 affordable housing by the Council. It asked whether the Council should only acquire Section 106 affordable homes within developments where the developer's intention was to seek the adoption of the infrastructure of roads and green infrastructure by the relevant public authorities, and where there would be no requirement for the infrastructure to be managed by a private management company, therefore protecting the residents and the council from unregulated and escalating service charges. It proposed that any 106 homes acquired by the council should meet the standards set out in the council's climate emergency supplementary planning document, including net zero carbon targets and high energy efficiency standards and subsystems. It also requested that officers introduce a due diligence checklist for acquisitions and establish performance measures within the relevant service area plan with annual reporting to Overview and Scrutiny Committee on outcomes, including acquisition numbers and compliance. It also suggested that Cabinet considered that the Council should write to local members of Parliament to seek support for raising these matters at a national level. And my officer's response is that while the motion sought to introduce a fixed acquisition criteria relating to adoption, arrangements and environmental standards, that a blanket approach would significantly constrain the Council's ability to secure affordable housing due to the constraints that would put on it. We therefore recommend a case-by-case acquisition approach supported by the Housing Development Strategy and Programme Forum and guided by a set of strategic design intentions, which is a framework that we're developing for the forum to be able to make informed decisions on acquiring Section 106 homes. This approach will enable the council to balance housing need, climate objectives, financial viability and deliverability while continuing to pursue higher quality outcomes wherever possible. Therefore, I recommend that Scrutiny notes the contents of the report and the response, agrees not to have a fixed blanket acquisition criteria for all Section 106 homes, as this would constrain the council's ability to secure affordable housing, endorses the adoption of a case-by-case approach supported by the Housing Development Strategy and Programme Forum, who will make recommendations as guided by the design intentions, bearing in mind that forum doesn't have a decision-making power. Those decisions are still retained by Cabinet. It's a guidance, it's a sort of first check guidance forum. And further supports the development of a proportionate due diligence framework to inform those decisions, enabling officers to consider adoption arrangements, management structure, environmental standards, viability and deliverability on a scheme-specific basis.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Melrose, you indicated you wanted to...
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just to set a bit more of I should have said both of these motions had a bit of a clairvoyant, as in the previous one we approved the motion 3rd December, 5th of December, the Government's Children Poverty Strategy was published. 2 weeks after the Section 106 motion was approved by Council, the Government launched its consultation on housing management companies. I have asked all the people who proposed the motions for the lottery numbers, but sadly not yet, because of their clairvoyancy. So in that one, they launched a consultation for about 12 weeks. It ended at the beginning of March, and it is around the issues that we were talking about in that Section 106 motion. So the unadopted amenities, Home Writers Acts, it's talking about SUDs, road adoption, green spaces. So that obviously that consultation has ended, so we are looking to see what the government comes out with that as well, which I suspect is going to align with what we were all discussing at that motion in December.
Thank you, Councillor Melrose. Members. Councillor Gorman.
So what measures does the council have in place to protect itself against service charges increasing to an extent that hadn't been anticipated?
So the first safety net, as it were, is in our planning documents. And in our planning documents, it sets out that the intent is for the developer to offer in the first instance the adoption of the green spaces and the SIDs to the local authority. So during the planning approval stage, as part of the negotiation on the Section 106, the planning officers and the green spaces team will negotiate with the developer that they would offer it to us in the first instance, and that's a council planning policy. However, the developers can say no, but the green spaces team work very hard to try and negotiate that we adopt the green spaces in the first instance, and the developer then pays a commuted sum to the council, and we hold that money and then we manage it. So that would mean there wouldn't need to be a management company. So that's our first safety net. Sometimes that hasn't happened, so there might be some old planning applications and things are coming through more recently, and then the second thing is if something gets through an appeal, then it won't necessarily have the same arrangements in place, so that you will find some areas where we haven't been able to, where there is a management company in place, and I think that's perhaps prompted it. We wouldn't want to say that we wouldn't necessarily buy the Section 106s outright on that estate, because we may want to buy them for other reasons. But we will look at the affordability of what those management charges are when we're looking at whether or not we would recommend they be purchased.
So is there anything that can be done to try and prevent those charges increasing? Because you're saying you'll consider it, but I'm not hearing there's anything you can do, like if they're increased to a really high level.
Councillor Melrose identified that so where there is, I understand, so where there is a management company in place already, perhaps they're the ones that you're talking about, the government has done a consultation exercise on it about the way forward, but the findings of that are not out yet. So where somebody does have a management company in place, then no, we would, us in housing development would not be involved in that going forward.
And then the other issue with adoption that I'm very aware of in my ward is that it can take a really long time before roads and green spaces are adopted. Do you have any discussions with the developers about that when you're acquiring properties?
Yeah, the roads obviously are the county council and they're under separate legislation, so that's a county council issue. However, roads may sometimes be adopted at the end because they don't want them to be damaged. So whilst if there's a big site and there's a lot of work going on site, they won't want to finish them. So they'll only be adopted if they meet a certain standard in terms of quality and materials, but they won't finish them to that standard right until the very end because it's likely that trucks and things going over the development will re-damage it. So that's generally, they are adopted later on in the scheme, but that's between the county council and the developer. They're responsible for roads. In terms of the green spaces, the adoption is whether or not we're going to adopt them is normally agreed during planning stage, and if it's not been agreed there, then the green spaces team will try and negotiate and work with them even during development to still adopt them.
I think it's unfortunate we don't have Councillor Bode here tonight as the Chair of Planning. I actually totally agree with you, Councillor Gorman. I'm aware of at least one road in Chase Meadow that I don't think has been adopted in more than 25 years now. Still has not been adopted. And I know in my own ward I have quite a few roads, and I'm sure all members probably have broadly similar problems where the developers just will not put up what is necessary to do to get those roads adopted. I don't know what we can do, but I would like perhaps in consultation with Councillor Bode, he and I perhaps to discuss this issue about how we can use the planning process to actually get proper adoption of roads and green spaces, because as far as I can see, it's not very effective at the moment. Now, Councillor Whiteman was before you, Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Chair. I think I was the person who seconded this motion, so it's one, you know, in terms of leasehold, it's something that I feel quite strongly about. It's something that the current government has indicated it is going to address the injustice of, but so far the steps it has taken have been very slow and probably a little bit inadequate, to be honest. But in terms of this motion, which I think was unanimously approved by Council, the driving force behind it was that where there is one of these leasehold charges, if the local authority is buying such a property subject to a leasehold charge, as we understood it, as landlord, it would be the responsibility then of the local authority to pay the charge. But given the rents are set, there would not be the ability to pass that on to tenants. Is that correct?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. The principle is if you can't have, if there's a piece of affordable within a big site, the affordable will follow the whole site. You won't have a separate scheme for adoption or non-adoption just for the affordable. Is that
Sorry, no, that wasn't what I was saying. I do apologise if I wasn't making myself clear. What I was saying was, if the local authority chooses to acquire properties on an estate, I appreciate it would only be the affordable section it would be buying, but all of the properties on that estate, which is classed as a private estate, albeit most of them are not private estates in the true sense of the word. They are, you know, public areas. If the local authority were to purchase such a property, it would be the local authority as the landlord of the property that would be required to pay the private developer the management charge. Is that correct? It wouldn't be able to pass it on to the tenant because the statutory rents are set, you know, they're capped. Is that correct?
I think that's the difference between affordable rents and social rents. And I think I probably need to come back. I think in an affordable rent, the service charges are included. That's right, isn't it? So that would be assumed as part of that rent charge. So there wouldn't be an additional charge. However, I think on a social rent, I think there is a service charge. I think they're excluded. Need to come back to you on that. It's about the rent setting policy. But definitely, if you live in a house that's got an affordable rent, don't forget they're already paying a lot more. They're paying 80% of market rate. If it's got an affordable rent, then the service charge is subsumed. So whether or not that's a management fee, I think I'd have to double check that.
Because the concern is that the management fee shouldn't be passed on to, you know, some of the more vulnerable members of our society. But even if the landlord is acquiring that and we are paying it as a local authority, it doesn't feel a very good use of the housing revenue account to be paying money to a private developer and putting it in their back pockets. It doesn't really feel what the HRA was really designed.
Yes, it depends what it is and what they do with it. Councillor Melrose.
I think I may have a simple answer to the question. So you're talking about if we purchase property A and it has no service charge, and we purchase property B and it has one, and they're identical houses, same build, same amount of bedrooms, there's a thing called the local housing allowance rate, which basically is government saying this is what you can charge. Obviously it's based on how many bedrooms, where you are, etc. But them two houses should have the same house price, or sorry, rent, and then every year, as we do with our housing revenue budget, as we as a council, we decide what the rent increase is, which is what the house rent was, plus a percentage. So they shouldn't be impacted. But yes, that cost of a service charge would be then somewhere in the HRA is paying for it. So if you think about it, someone, our taxpayer money in the HRA, someone is paying it. Is it directly to that tenant or is it as a collective is probably the way to think about it.
I think it might be helpful if officers then can prepare just a little analysis on this, because I think it's an interesting question, which even now I'm not quite sure what the answer was. I think Councillor Melrose may be closer than I thought I was to it, but I think, Councillor Whiteman, let's officers get into the heart of this.
I think, you know, my understanding accords actually with Councillor Melrose's on that ultimately there is not the option to charge extra to a social tenant simply because it's subject to a management fee. So ultimately somebody would have to absorb that. That would have to be the local authority who is the landlord, which is the point I'm making.
But if I recall correctly, then there's also an adjustment at the end of each year for electricity, gas and other things in certain blocks. So I'm not sure it's quite as straightforward as that.
It'd be interesting to get some clarification
I think
on the management fee anyway.
Can we have
but
some
it
clarification,
strikes
rather
me,
than take up our time tonight, if we can have some clarification about house service fees, management charges, whatever you want to call them, we know what we're talking about, how those are actually reflected or not reflected in rents. And if they're not reflected in rents, presumably, as you say, Councillor Whiteman, it's the HRA that pays, HRA revenue account rather.
I think in any event, there was a strong feeling here that we, you know, as a local authority, spending quite considerable money purchasing and acquiring these properties, you know, for our local residents, we should be doing what we can to drive up standards, you know, environmental standards. We should be seeking to deal with this injustice of fleasehold, you know, in our area where we can. You know, it's been recognised as such by national government, and certainly, you know, the unanimous decision of council in passing this motion was that there ought to be some criteria that we adopt around this. Now, in terms of adopting a case-by-case basis, I can kind of understand the feeling that we don't want to be bound by any restrictions. We would like to have some overriding discretion, you know, where there was an overriding other reason that might sort of cap it. But it's disappointing for me that there doesn't seem to be at least any record or any intent to have a policy recording the kind of criteria that we would take into account, because if there was the option, for example, of acquiring a property, you know, one with a management charge and one without, I would like to think on every occasion we would, other things being equal, acquire the one without the management charge, and at least having some policy to reflect that, I think would potentially send a message out to the local market that, you know, that could influence the number of these leasehold arrangements that are causing some quite serious issues to some of our local residents.
Yeah, so we are developing a framework that's draft, that's been to the forum, which sets that out. So once that's been through the forum and approved, I can bring that back.
Okay, but the paper that's come before us is telling us to adopt a case-by-case basis. So I'm just sort of saying, I mean, if it was saying there will be a framework setting out criteria and this will be one of the criteria, I'd feel quite happy to support it. But the recommendation is saying we should really, it's you know, the officers say no, we will just adopt a case-by-case, and there is no commitment whatsoever that this will even be considered as a relevant criteria. Am I misreading that?
No, what I've said is that there's a set of criteria that we've written that were established based on the number of principles, including environmental, including space standards. And if a scheme comes to the forum, to the members, then we will bank it against each of those tests. But I think what I was trying to say was, even if it, for example, doesn't meet the environmental standards, I wouldn't necessarily say just strike that out, because there might be work that could be done. We might be able to buy them and work done on those properties, or we might say we want to buy them regardless because they came through on old planning applications, but we're absolutely desperate for affordable housing. There's a balance, I guess, between delivery of affordable homes. So some of these schemes are playing catch up, so eventually it will stop because they're coming through on old planning policy. So the new ones that come through will already be on the approved standards, but there can be a lag between approval at planning and when they eventually get built out. So it's really only those that we're considering that might not meet the standards. But there might be a time in which the authority would still want to buy them. So, for example, if no other registered provider wants to buy those affordable homes, and we're the last person that could buy them, if we say no, then I suppose those homes are lost. We then get a commuted sum, but that's always considered less preferable. So that's the balancing decision that I'm trying to say.
Could you clarify that circumstance where we're the purchaser of last resort?
Yes,
do we go in and then negotiate the prices substantially down? Because last purchaser, and we have a big checkbook because we can buy tens of houses.
No, we wouldn't push the price because we're the purchaser of last resort, but we do always negotiate at what we think the current price is.
Why not? This is a commercial business we're dealing with. Even if it's Vistry or whatever, it's a commercial business we're dealing with.
Because
if they've misjudged the market, they have to take the pain.
Well, no, at that point, the developer can put in a viability argument and can take us through viability and say that they no longer have to provide the affordable home. So that is in some situations at the moment. So it's a very fine balance between them accepting a lower offer and it no longer being financially viable for them to deliver that affordable scheme that was policy compliant.
Sorry, we're talking about completed or uncompleted? Uncompleted
well,
houses.
What happens is the developer often doesn't do the selling of the affordable right until the build out at the end. So they don't normally get the sale agreed at the outset. They normally start building and then go into negotiations. So we could have rolled on to the schemes very, very nearly ready to finish, and it's still not an approved purchaser.
Councillor Melrose, before I wanted to go, I think it was Councillor Jones, isn't it, and then Councillor Knight. You wanted to make a comment?
Yes, I think I was just trying to use more, because I know obviously 4.3 to 4.5 mentions the framework, but sort of try and give a general example, because obviously I don't want to mention what the site is, because obviously we could still be in negotiation. I don't want to go in confidential. but I used that when a site came to us about housing, saying that the registered providers haven't. The Housing Strategy Development, I'll get the name wrong of course all the time, Housing Development Strategy and Programme Forum, which a few of us cabinet members sit on, look at it and we'll look and go, actually, do we want to purchase there? We might use our, and there has been sites where we go, actually no, we know there's a service charge there, we know what the issues around that estate is, actually purchasing these properties would actually cause more constraints or financial pressures on us from maybe tenants moving constantly. So there are times where we will reject, and obviously that one of the questions we have in our heads is there a service charge? We do look at the initiative officially, but also sometimes it's going, actually, can people get on and off the estate? And if they can't, then other factors will base in. So that's why, but there will be some times where developers will gift us houses, and there has been options of that. And potentially that is a conversation going, if they're offering to give us 10, I won't say 10 properties, would we pass up free council housing? I don't know anyone would.
Councillor Davison.
Just must say, Councillor Whiteman, I have great sympathy with what you're saying. I think it's a very good point, and it's obviously up to you as members, but you might want to say you want clearer criteria rather than just case-by-case basis, and you might also want to say, proof of the pudding argument, you want to see what actually happens in the next few agreements.
And Councillor Melrose, I would think that my concern is I don't want us to be seen as a soft touch. I think commercial dealers have to understand that they are dealing with, well, we're not a business, we still have I suppose it's council taxpayers to hold all of us 44 to account. And, well, I think they have to understand that. Now, I think it was Councillor Jones.
Mine is on a separate topic, so I'm happy to let someone in come.
Councillor Curtis, yours on the same topic? Yes. And then Councillor Knight, I think.
Okay.
Okay, whichever one of you two.
I'm
Councillor
on
Knight.
the same topic where last resorts, where I don't really understand if we are the last resort because the builder then try other method they didn't succeed, but we can negotiate a price, a better price for us.
Oh no, so I'll just explain how it works. We have a housing development team, and they work as part of the strategic programme team under David Elkington. It's their role to negotiate on behalf of the authority, and they will do that commercially. So we all have in our heart public value, and that we need to absolutely make sure that we get the best value for people and taxpayers. So they will do a commercial negotiation. But what we can't do is make an offer so low that it's no longer financially viable for that developer to provide a policy compliant scheme. So if that happens, then we have to go into negotiations what the next steps are, but they will always do a commercial negotiation. The strategy about how we decide what we're going to consider to buy in the framework would sit with me because we're housing, and then the commercial aspect would sit with the housing development team. So they will do that. But equally, the developer will have a set of costs that is cost for them to build that scheme. They're already taking slightly less than they would get, well, much less than they'd get in the open market, and they'll have factored that into all of their work. Where we can't get to an agreement, then we will normally, we've got cascade mechanisms in our section 106 that we'll follow. And sometimes it might mean that we'd get a commuted sum in lieu of those affordable homes, and then the council could use that to build or develop other accommodation that might suit its needs better. But there's always a commercial negotiation. But that doesn't mean that the developer they will have a bottom price as well that they can take for their viability. And if we can't agree, then they get an external consultant via the planning legislation to do their viability assessment, and then equally we will get a separate one, and then we will have a negotiated piece after that.
Can I just clarify that? Do we not use somebody like CBRE or Cushman & Wakefield in those negotiations as a matter of course? So in other words, a national property company.
Oh, yes. So the housing development team will take advice from on pricing schedules from, they'll get prices taken in. They will, of course, take external advice on what they think that will be. But at the end of the day, it's the officer's decision on, backed by finance, on what they're willing to negotiate.
Okay, Councillor Kohler.
Thank you very much. Going back specifically to this language about case by case, I think it's the language that, like Councillor Whiteman, I have a bit of a problem with. I think if it's, so in recommendation 2.4, endorses the adoption of a case-by-case approach to the acquisition, I think I would be a lot happier if, for example, it said endorses the adoption of a management by exception process, because then that would imply that there's a process. So if they don't meet one of these criteria, then there's a process. But it kind of sends the message that we expect that most of the time they are going to meet all of the criteria we want them to meet. But where they don't, but officers feel we shouldn't, pass over the opportunity, there's some kind of process there. So I think that language would help me be happier with it.
Councillor Kohler, Councillor Whiteman, you're sitting next to each other. Are you proposing some change language here? And if so, exactly what are you proposing?
I would agree with Councillor Kohler that I think, I'd like the wording to reflect that we are adopting a criteria. I think I'd like it to be clear that it is very much by exception. I mean, I personally would like most of what we are requiring not to have a fleasehold charge on it. I'm not convinced in the current market, where it's not red hot. I mean, I know when it's red hot and where the buyer of last resort, there may be the temptation then to sell it privately. But at the moment, I'm not sure that reflects the reality. I think, we actually have some commercial clout at the moment. To actually say, we can purchase these from you, but we have certain standards and we want to promote those standards environmentally and in terms of adoption of, construction of the public spaces and, ideally the roads to a standard which are adoptable, because I think the developers are not treating our residents right in some of these estates, and we need to use whatever pressure we can bring to bear to do it. So I'm going off down a rabbit hole again. The wording...
Shall I come back in?
Yeah, I'll let Councillor Kohler come in with some wording and
So my suggestion, and before I make it an official proposal, I'd very much like to hear what officers think. So in 2.4, rather than case by case, simply substitute case by case for management by exception.
Can you clarify what you mean by that? Because I think officers and members of the public listening to this would like to understand that.
Management by exception simply means that if it meets all of the criteria, then you just proceed. If there is a criteria that it doesn't meet, you have an exception process to trigger, which says, well, I think we should still go ahead with this because of X, Y, Z. So it's simply a kind of a get-out clause where the officers can trigger if they know it doesn't meet all the criteria we would like it to meet, but they still think we should proceed. Just to be very clear, I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference, but I think it sends the message that we expect, rather than case by case is kind of we expect them to be all over the place, is the impression it gives, whereas management by exception kind of implies that the number of exceptions wouldn't be that high.
And what would it be? I think the thing that I'm missing here is what it would be the exception to. Because the criteria as set out in the original motion aren't included in the recommendation. So do we need to add something along the lines of management by exception from the original wording of the motion or some of the full council motion?
I always find that officers are much better at phrasing these sorts of things than me.
So officers, could you... sorry, Councillor Gorman, you wanted to add something first before I go to officers.
Yes, it feels like we're just trying to avoid the word policy. So we've used all sorts of words, criteria, process, framework. What is the difference between all these things and management by exception? Do we just have a particular issue with the word policy? What's the difference?
Officers, I'm going to throw this one over to you now. You get a sense that we're not, I don't know if there's a majority here because we haven't gone to a vote and we're not going to for a while yet, but I think you get a sense that members don't think this fully reflects what we wanted to say at council. And I think you're right, Councillor Wyman, it was unanimous from what I remember.
So I use the term framework as an assessment tool to in order members to be able to make a decision. And I think I use the term framework reflecting on the fact that we're a council made up of differing interests. And I just felt a framework was easier for people to understand that they could make a decision based upon that rather than trying to get a one policy agreement. I think that's probably the reason I'd use that term. A framework is a decision-making guidance tool, I suppose, rather than a discrete policy.
Councillor Firth?
Could policy sit within that framework? Could there not be any things that we...
Mr. Knight wants to...
Yeah, I think what I would say is I think we've probably got the gist of what needs to be done taken away. I think having a quick Google, as I just did, a policy defines what should be done and why, while a framework provides a structure and guidance on how to achieve it, according to AI. Only joking. Just a quick Google, a quick Google search. I mean, ultimately, policy as well would be a cabinet approval as well. So that's a formal a document as well. So I would probably suggest that we've got some really good suggestions coming from Councillor Kohler and Councillor Whiteman. And I just probably take that away now to work up and then test back with members.
Yes, we could be here till... Yes. Councillor Whiteman.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit difficult. I mean, my one concern here is we're recommending future acquisitions, a buyer strategy or a framework or whatever we choose to call it that we haven't seen yet, you know, and I would have to say that my concern here, you know, certainly from the motion, was that one of the criteria that was prominent within that policy, if we can call it a policy, because I quite like policy, I think that's a little bit stronger than framework, but that's just me. But regardless of what we call it, I think adoption and avoiding fleasehold ought to be one of the prominent criteria within it. I'm not clear at the moment whether it is, because 1.7 it's not actually referred to at all, so I haven't seen the policy or framework. I would feel much happier supporting
Can I make a suggestion?
discretion, you know, to the overall framework or policy if we saw it and agreed it and were satisfied that it was framed in accordance with what we our objectives were in bringing that motion. And I think what we should be very clear about is if we did bring forward proposals that were contrary to the policy or framework when agreed, I suspect there would be quite robust debate about whether we should go ahead in council, because this invariably will need to be signed off in council, and I think you know, it would send a powerful message out to the market, in my view.
Councillor Melrose.
So I think I've heard from everyone. So I'm proposing, because obviously there is a draft framework that's been written. I appreciate we've had people having double hats at the moment. There's been leave and stuff. So we were hoping to have that framework here at the same time, which I think would have helped the discussion. I'll take that for learning. I think let us go back, bring this report again with the framework, because I'm sure members here will have a lot to say around the framework and may have some tweaks. And then we bring the cabinet paper. I think that would be my suggestion, because I think having that visual would help everyone see the framework. And when Councillor Kohler talks about management by exception, we can say actually there are certain criteria. I don't want to, and I agree, obviously all decisions of acquisition of any council, of new council properties, is a council decision. And I think it would help not just members of this committee, but the whole council going, this is how this forum, which just makes the initial decision, do we proceed or not, and how it comes through. Because at least then for councillors, there's that reassurance. We've asked the questions like energy efficiency, service charges, adoption of roads, can you get out of the estate or not? Them sort of questions. I think that'll help everyone. And I know we probably will discuss it in the many housing briefings that you've all got coming up over the next several months.
Ms. Hobbs.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a good idea, Councillor Moser. It was just to point out, because I've just realised that perhaps it wasn't clear, that the framework covers both acquisitions, but also when we're the developer. So the council owns a number of small...
Sorry, unfortunately, Mr. Melgard sneezed exactly inappropriate.
On purpose.
Could you just go back from what you just said? And it may just be me because I'm furthest away from you.
We've got this, whatever we call it, a policy, a framework. We've got a number of criteria, and they're set out for whether or not the council is the developer or we are purchasing them as a Section 106. So they're meant to go against both. And you haven't seen them, so it's hard to discuss it, but they're ranked. So there's like an exemplar. So the very best standard that you'd want something built to is really what we'd expect our own sites to be built out to. And then there's a baseline, which is the minimum you'd expect when you're purchasing Section 106s. So I suppose that's why it's meant to be flexible, because the very high end, we would really expect the council to do the best of the best, set the standard. And the 106s, we would want it to meet your base standards and not really go any lower. So that's what this document sets out. So I think Jessie's right. If we can bring that back, then that will be easier to have a discussion about.
I don't know whether it's frameworks policy. I'm now going to introduce a new term, guidelines. But Councillor Melrose, can you confirm then you're going to take this away from the cabinet meeting in 10 days' time and come back at a later time? I think we would. The sense I'm getting around here is that members would rather postpone this, get it done, so we're all clear, because it was a very good debate we had in council, and that you will come back for May housing scrutiny.
Oh, go on then. Yeah, both these motions, just because we appreciate of the timing, we haven't put it in the forward plan for April, just because in case there were any changes of that regard. So obviously we could proceed with the temporary accommodation one. This one, let's go back, come back with the framework. I'll bring a glossary of what each policy, guideline, framework and all that brings as well, so everyone knows exactly what everything means, because I appreciate that they could be interchangeable but mean different things. And let's have a discussion about that. And then obviously when it comes to cabinet and obviously wider council, when we obviously do the first acquisition, we're all of the same understanding of what we have questioned as a collective before we've purchased council housing, which I think would be beneficial, and also send a message out to developers of these are our questions, this is what we're expecting.
Councillor Jones, I just saw you put your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I appreciate that we're likely to, we are taking this away now to come back with, and in that spirit, perhaps I could offer something else to go away with and come back on in addition to that. I mean, my understanding of this committee is that our sort of role, our objective is to cover the state of our housing stock and oversee its recovery towards an excellent standing according to the regulators, which means that this sort of Section 106 arguably sits ever so slightly outside of the scope of, could arguably sit slightly outside of the scope of this committee. I wonder if it'd be useful if, when it comes back, we might, before doing so, invite members in addition to Councillor Bode to join us to potentially add to the discussion, as obviously Section 106, it concerns elements which are more of, would benefit from those with an expertise in planning, in addition to our concerns in once we've already adopted it. So I think that could be something that we consider sending an invite out to additional members of planning.
Councillor Kohler.
There was another sidetrack that I was going to offer for general consumption, which was that the report obviously talks about the HSDPF, which the Housing Development Strategy and Programme Forum, if I've got that right. My understanding of it is that there are some portfolio holders that sit on it. It's supported by officers. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it does not meet in public. minutes are not published or shared with councillors. The work plan is, or agendas are not shared, so it's purely confidential. There's no public aspect to it at all. So the suggestion I was going to offer for debate is whether we substitute the Housing Development Strategy Programme Forum with the Housing Scrutiny Committee.
In sense of all new developments, sorry, you're referring, I presume, to 4.1, 4.2.
Correct.
As well. I'm not sure that that's appropriate because if I've understood that section correctly, this is part of to do with the direct acquisition of specific sites or housing as against the general policy. But
so the way that 4.2 is phrased is that it is there to, the HSDPF acts as assurance that development projects that come forward to Cabinet are in the best interests of the Council. I guess considering that it's only Cabinet members, senior officers that sit on it, and other members have no sight of it, I don't see how it can perform that role of providing any assurance. Whereas the Housing Scrutiny Committee, even if it's considering matters confidentially, it is still accessible to all councillors to either partake or to see the documents, and therefore that would provide some assurance.
Councillor Melrose.
So the reason the agendas and minutes aren't really published is basically because we're discussing sites. They're obviously commercial, confidential discussions, and obviously, as you appreciate, we don't want that out in the public. Hence why it's quite a closed meeting. With any decision that, let's say we want to purchase X amount of houses here, obviously we're just the first step. It has to come to Cabinet, which with every Cabinet paper and every acquisition we ever have to do, there's a chance that ONS call it in, and I know ONS Overview and Scrutiny, have called in some acquisitions during my tenure here. And then obviously there's the opportunity at Council, which I think we all remember in confidential session, there was questions raised around a certain acquisition. So there are opportunities, and that's why we've kept that form a bit more closed. Where there are specific discussions, we do sometimes, and as Nicola Hobbs will agree, speak to the ward councillors of that area if we think that they are in a need-to-know basis because it's on their particular ward. Hence why if there's nothing in yourself, Councillor Collar, you probably haven't had the phone call from me going, hello, this development, we have them conversations just so we get their perspective as well. But obviously appreciate we don't want to put so much confidential information and minutes of some very sensitive discussions because we could be saying actually of these preferences, which it says in the paper what the preferences could be. It could be where they want to change the mix of the affordable homes. They think they need to go through feasibility. The more we open up, the more risk some details get out, which I'm very conscious we don't want to do. But if it is something around that framework, and that's why I was talking about that framework, this is what the decisions will be based on. Obviously, when it comes to a report, if let's say we require 10, we bring the framework and say, look, this meets the framework of X, Y, Z, and then there's still opportunity for you to question at Overview and Scrutiny, at Cabinet, you can call it in, and Council. So there are opportunities for all members, so it's not just myself and the others who sit on the committee. And to go back to Councillor Jones, Councillor King, as the planning, has not a frequent member, but he has gone on there before, and we do talk about certain acquisitions in terms of planning. Part of that framework, which is around that condition of the house, because what I don't want is to buy houses that we're going to have to retrofit. There's a gas pipe in the middle of the living room. I'm trying to think of everything I've seen, the walls are decaying, mould, like that. We don't want that, and there are checks that they do, and that was the answer to my question in the actions around that scheme stages checklist to check the stock and the condition of the house before we acquire it, because we don't want to take things off products which actually are going to cost us an arm and a leg to fix and a shoddy.
Councillor Kohler, come back, but I think I'm on this point.
If I may just push back very gently, two specific areas. One is the wording of 4.2 implies that the HSDPF is providing assurance to the council. And since a very limited number of councillors are able to know what's going on, I would suggest that that's not quite right. And the other is that I totally get the point about ONS being able to call in decisions. I have done so. I enjoy doing so. But I think the expertise of this committee in housing matters is slightly different, and therefore if they were consulted, and they don't meet just before cabinet, so they don't have that call-in ability, so therefore if it was brought in at an earlier stage through the housing committee, if this was part of the exception process, for example, then I think that would provide assurance to the council.
I think if I can summarise this up, bear with me. Councillor Melrose, you've had your say. Councillor Davison.
I was just going to say, Councillor Kohler, I think basically I'm in agreement with you. The Housing Development Strategy and Programme Forum is a development body trying to get things moving. You'll be aware there are a lot of things stuck in the pipeline and not moving, and I think it's doing that job. But in formal terms, these are all cabinet reports and cabinet decisions, so it's the cabinet things that happen. And I feel it's actually up to the chairs of the scrutiny committees to decide how they want to do things. They don't have to wait for cabinet papers if they don't want to. They can ask for things in advance. I think we can do that. And they can certainly ask for review of what we've done and so on. So I think it's sort of up to the chairs of scrutiny to decide how to do that.
Yeah. Councillor Kohler, I think I understand your points. I think one of the things we've got to be careful of is we are a scrutiny committee rather than getting involved in the decisions whether to go ahead with an acquisition or not. In the decision-making stage, we have to scrutinise that decision. So we do have a process, as Mr. Knight's just suggested to me, and I think it's and Councillor Hales about we have a regular chairs meeting, the three chairs meeting. I think you've made some valid points there, but I think it's not our role to get into the decision making of the cabinet. It is our role to scrutinise that decision making. I do think the wording here, you've got a point, access assurance. I don't think that should be included in there because I don't think that is as insurance. It's either ONS or us who would be acting as assurance. And Councillor Myrtle and I will certainly have that discussion, and please take it up with your colleague as well. Now, did I see Councillor Jones? I did, yes. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. And Councillor Melrose is quite right to bring up the quality of the housing when we purchase them as a really vital point in this policy, or at least the way I see it. If we're going to be writing a policy about the conditions under which we buy newly constructed homes, we might as well include within that policy the actual quality of the physical home itself in the terms that we the policy that we adopt. I am somewhat wondering though, because you suggested, Councillor suggested that we could incur several thousands of pounds, but in a scenario where we're purchasing a new build as opposed to a pre-existing home, is there not a snag list and a big opportunity for us to...
snag list.
Yeah, for us to fix any of the major issues with the home via the developer's responsibilities. And in that scenario, how would we go about communicating what I would assume to be the first tenant to be possibly the lead responsible person to identify the major issues with the home so that we can go back to the house builder?
Yeah, there is. With the housing development team, so they're the people that operationalise the purchasing and then oversee the acquisitions that then bring it into stock. And it's their job to accept or refuse bringing that house in. And obviously they have a full range of snagness, and they'll work with that developer to either say yes or no. And that's quite a big piece of work. Sadly, my colleague Becky was going to come today because we thought there might be a lot of development questions, but she couldn't attend, but I will absolutely bring her to our next one.
So do we run out of opportunity to provide a snagged list once the first tenant moves in? Because of course the best person to tell us whether the house is up to stock would be the first tenant, who, rather than an officer who spends 20 minutes in the house looking for any defects here and there.
No, once the house is handed over, then it comes into stock, and then it's handed over into an asset management piece and then the landlord services piece. But if there's issues that were defects, then assets would bring them back to the housing development team, and we would negotiate that back with the developer. So absolutely, if the home isn't fit for purpose, then we wouldn't accept that, and we would work with the developer to make sure that's rectified. If it's that it's just going wrong because it's wear and tear, then assets start picking that up as part of their work.
Are they not subject to an HSBC 10-year guarantee as well?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I hope we are an absolute menace to the housing developers in that region.
Yeah, they're a small team, but they're very persistent in making sure that we only take on the houses that are suitable and good quality.
It is an issue. I've certainly had in one of my developments more than one house where the developer has refused to do the snagging. So it's something that I'm just to feed back to you, that the developers aren't necessarily responsive to snagging, and every new build, by definition, just was going to have some items to be snagged. So it's something we need to be pretty strong on, because we're not necessarily getting the support from the developers I would expect.
Actually, I could bring my colleague when we come back, Becky from development, and then if there's further questions about development, then she can pick that up.
I'm trying to wrap this up, Councillor Melrose, so I'm going to let you be the last speaker on this.
No, that's fine, and I think it's just to reflect back on what I said with the answer to one of the actions was around the scheme stages checklist will be coming in May for feedback, which is obviously that interim control around the process of affordability coming into Warwick District. So that bit around, there is that, and it will come to you in May. So I look forward to all your questions in the next several weeks. I'm sure you'll be preparing for.
Sorry. So I think I'm not going to put this 2-1 to 2-5 to the vote, because I don't think there's this stage there's going to be an agreement for us to recommend that to Council. And I note that Councillor Melrose has withdrawn it from Cabinet, or is going to withdraw it from Cabinet in the appropriate process for this time round. We'll bring it back in the next cycle. So I think, Councillor Melrose, you've had a good idea of where our concerns are, and I think maybe you share quite a lot of them. Councillor Whiteman and Councillor Kohler, I think probably we're going to ask you to maybe help myself as well, provide feedback to Councillor Melrose before it gets back into the cycle. Would that be acceptable to you too? Yeah, thank you. So on that basis, I'm not going to put a vote and not going to ask you not to recommend it, because I think the fundamentals part of the paper are there. It just needs the last 10% polishing off. Are you happy with that, officers?
Yes, thank you, yeah, and we'll bring it back. Was it May?
May 27. 27, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, members. That was a very useful discussion. We actually have now reached the point where I'm going to ask to exclude the public and press, but before I do, I just want to make a comment to officers, please. I know your job's not to tell taxpayers spend all our time producing reports, but I do note that we've had 3 reports that are late again tonight. Easter did get in the way. It's not yet becoming a trend, Mr. Melgard, but it's something I think I'm concerned that it might be becoming a trend. And it's so important, particularly when you see a debate like that we get the papers in time. And I would ask committees, officers and committee services to reflect that going forward. On a happier note, and I want to do this in public, because before we go into private session. As you probably may well have seen, Josie Wainwright is leaving the committee services. It's a happier note, not because she's leaving the district council, because she's actually going to possibly be on the other side of the table in 8 weeks' time. But Josie, I want to publicly thank you for everything you've done for the Housing Scrutiny Committee. It makes a hell of a difference, I tell you. She's done a tremendous job. You don't know the amount of work she does in the background. And I don't know the amount of work she does in the background. I see more than you do. So I publicly want to put on record, and please, I know it might embarrass you putting this in the minutes, but please put in the minutes that this committee thanks you for all your work and wish you well in your new role. And I'm sure members, you will agree with that. Yes, and again, that's unanimous. So, yes. So thank you, Josie.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to work with you and for the members, and I wish the committee continued success. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to move on to item 7. You've seen the proposal to exclude press and the public. Not that we have any, but we will have maybe those online. To consider resolving that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, that the public and press be excluded from the meeting for the following items by reason of the likely disclosure of exempt information within the paragraph 3 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, following the Local Government Access to Information Variation Order 2006. This is a mouthful each time. May I have a proposer for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Whiteman, and a seconder, Councillor Knight. Can I show all hands of those in favour? Councillor Barton? Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you.